industry in Oklahoma. And to discuss with this evening, we have two leaders in this field, people who have not only engaged vigorously in business activity for many years within the state of Oklahoma, but who have worked at it nationally as well as regionally and in fact even internationally. So in bringing us this story this evening, our first speaker is Mr. Raymond A. Young of the TG&Y Stores. And he will tell us something of the development of this organization. He's a native of Oklahoma, in fact, born in Stillwater, quite near where I've been all these many years. He earned a Bachelor of Science degree in business at Oklahoma State University. He decided he'd go into teaching briefly. He served as a high school principal, I found, but then he decided there must be a better way. And so he worked as a manager or perhaps as a salesman. The record doesn't quite tell me, in the Crest stores, being assigned to a location in Colorado. Then he established the R.A. Young Company of Kingfisher and operated that successfully for a number of years from 1927 to 1936. In the year 1936, when we were just beginning to show some signs of coming out of the Great Depression, this firm was consolidated with the TG&Y Stores of Oklahoma City, and Mr. Young served as president of those stores from 1936 to 1964. And in that year 1964, he became chairman of the TG&Y Board of Directors in a capacity in which he served to the year 1970. And since that time, he has been honorary chairman of the TG&Y Board of Directors. In addition to this business service, he has served as a director of the Liberty National Bank, as a trustee of the Oklahoma Art Center. In fact, I saw you bring some works of art into and I said, well, that all goes. I mean, with his love for art, was that it? Stanley gave you the order. I see. So this all meshes perfectly. He serves as a director of the Oklahoma State University Development Foundation, as a director of the Oklahoma City YMCA, and this is only the beginning of the long line of community and state service that he has rendered. He is not only a director, but immediate past president of the Oklahoma Heritage Association, and we owe a lot to his 2-year leadership of this organization, and in addition, many other civic organizations. It's with a great deal of pleasure that I introduce this person who has meant so much to the state of Oklahoma and to all of us, and also a good personal friend of mine, Mr. Raymond A. Young. Right?
Thank you, Dr. Fisher, for that fine introduction. You know, nothing improves your hearing like a little praise. He told you that I am really retired, so I can kind of talk with, and if there's anything about our business you don't like, you're not supposed to see me later because I couldn't do anything about it anyway. In fact, I had one of our grandsons visiting us last summer, and I was getting ready to go to the office, and he says, Grandpa, what do you do at the office? And I says, nothing. He says, well, when do you know when you're through? I'm kind of glad, though, that this is, I'm being first because I want to hear Dean McGee, and we decided that we'd have the worst out of the way, and then you'd stay for it. But you know, this good group here, I know why you came. You came to hear Dean McGee. It reminds me of last fall, the mayor of Stillwater asked me to speak at their mayor's prayer breakfast in Stillwater. And they advertised all over the state. The governor-elect was going to be there, and you ought to have seen the crowd we had. And you know, I was smart enough to know they didn't come there to hear me, but the governor was there. I was comparing Dean McGee and myself as I gave the commencement address last Friday night at Chickasha at the university there, and Bruce Carter was telling about a big oil man that he had up at Miami when he was president up there, and said before he got through, he offered him $10,000 for a building. And then he turned to me and said, now if you have any such ideas, we're receptible, in a receptible mood. I told him, well, now you want to remember that I'm in the 5 and 10 cent business, and this is the oil business. So if they give $10,000, might be about $100. I am proud to be an Oklahoman. He mentioned I was from Stillwater. I'm proud of it, and it does remind me of a story. When I started really in business for myself at Kingfisher, and while I was there, I heard a lot about the Dalton outlaws. Did you ever hear of the Dalton brothers outlaws? Well, you know, they were raised on a farm just east of Dover. And 4 boys, as you know, became outlaws. In fact, about 3 or 4 months ago, we opened a store at Coffeyville, Kansas, and I went up there, and I was particularly interested because that's where they tried to rob 2 banks the same day, you know, and that's where Gratt got killed. But before these 4 Dalton boys were killed, all 4 of them, or the total they had stolen, was about $55,000. I read a story just the other day telling about these boys, and it said that the farm that they were raised on, where they left to start a life of crime, was now producing 10,000 barrels of oil a month. So the land they left to try to make a fortune was right underneath them, and they didn't know it. And that's the way I feel about Oklahoma. I'm proud to be an Oklahoman, and it's done a lot for me. As I understand, I'm to say a few words, and then you're going to ask questions if you want to. And I teach a men's Bible class, and I've always learned to put my watch down there and watch it, and if whether I'm through or not, I always quit on time, and the boys appreciate it. I've been asked to talk about our company, the TG&Y Stores, how we began, adversities, major decisions, basic management philosophies, and so forth. You know, it's hard to talk about your own business without people thinking you're bragging. And that reminds me of a definition of humility. Humility is the ability to act ashamed when you're telling people how great you are. I hope, though, I can be objective, and I want to confess here that we have done better than I ever thought we'd do, way back when I started before the Depression. I'm reminded of the story of the politician, the old renegade politician that was elected sheriff. And to everybody's surprise, they couldn't understand. So they asked him why it was that he got elected sheriff. And he said, well, it had worried him too, but he had figured it out. He said everybody that knew him voted for his opponent, and everybody that knew his opponent voted for him. And he said the other fellow just knowed more people than I did. And I believe that's the only way we've been successful, is maybe our competitors knew more people than we did. So a lot of people say I'm a self-made man. I want to deny that quickly because I had lots of help. But I'm reminded of the story of the self-made man. They were interviewing him and said, if you had to do over again, would you make any changes? And he said, yes. I said, what would that? He said, I'd go for help. I hope I can tell you about our company without getting confused. One time when I was down at the Chamber of Commerce, we had a little 4-H club program, and we were giving a prize to one of the boys, and after we'd did everything, we asked him if he had anything to say, and he got up and he said, well, all I can say is I want to thank you from my bottom to my heart. We think we have a good company, and we think that we have competent men. And our competitors agree. We say that our men are capable, and they say that's true. We're capable of anything. Our company, as some of you may know, is a division of City Products Company, which in turn is a division of Household Finance, which is the largest small loan company in the world. So if I ever need any money, I know where I can get it. On the 1st of this year, this company had loans of $2,367,000,000. It's a diversified company of finance, manufacturing, and merchandising, with City Products Corporation as the merchandise division. The City Products Company not only is the parent of TG&Y now, but is also the parent of White's Auto Stores, which some of you may know, the Ben Franklin Stores, which are variety stores, a group of furniture stores, one of the largest grocery chains in California, Vaughn's Grocery, and coast-to-coast auto stores. So they have a big retail division. We're proud of the fact that our former president, Mr. W. George, is now president or chairman of all of these divisions I talked about except groceries. Anyway, the stock I own in the company is household finance stock and not TG&Y stock. We have put out a brochure, yeah, here it is, on our company, and I'm going to leave some here. This is about 2 years old, but it'll tell you more about our company than I could tell you, and it's out from a real estate department point of view. We're telling everybody how great we are so that they'll rent us a building. And if any of you want any, you can have them there. By the end of this year, we expect to have 950 stores in operation in 30 states, doing a volume of about $800 million this year. In fact, our weekly sales now are around $12.5 million. I remember during the depth of the Depression, I had about 3 stores. I lived in Kingfisher, and our total volume for all 3 stores that year was $72,000. And yet we do $12.5 million a week now. We are the 4th largest variety chain in the nation in both number of stores and volume. To back up these stores, we operate 8 warehouses throughout the nation, 2 of them being in Oklahoma County. We have a new 350,000 square foot warehouse up at Edmond, and then what we call an import warehouse at 36th and Santa Fe behind our general offices. Besides this, we operate 2 manufacturing plants. One is the Central Fixture Manufacturing Company, which makes all of our fixtures, not only for ourselves, but for a number of other companies, and we ship them all over the United States. It's the largest fixture factory in this whole area. Then we have a silk screen processing company called Central Sales Promotion, and we do silk screen processing work. And this is the largest silk screen company between Chicago and Los Angeles. We ship this merchandise also all over the nation, besides furnishing our own stores. Of course, we have thousands of employees. In fact, we have about 27,000 employees, with about 2,000 of them in greater Oklahoma City. Our annual payroll in Oklahoma City is around $7.5 million per year. We do all of our own buying for these over 900 stores now, right here at 36th and Santa Fe. We have a large, as you would know, buying department. We also have a Hong Kong office where we do our import buying, and from this Hong Kong office, these men go to Tokyo, to Seoul, Korea, Taipei, and to Singapore, and so forth. So much for bragging about TG&Y. I might hurry to tell you just a little about the history of our company. I have to start with myself. He told you I was born in Stillwater. That is right. I was born on a farm. And after over 50 years, this is the first year I'm putting out a garden. Dean, are you looking forward to the time you retire like me, that you'd have time to put out a garden? Well, I'm getting a lot of fun out of it. I put my tomatoes out a little too early, and they're beginning to turn a little white from this freeze the other night. But I'm enjoying it because I was raised on a farm. I was one of 8 children, and we all graduated from Oklahoma State University. My oldest brother is 83. He's a retired engineer, civil engineer, and lives in Monroe, Louisiana. He was what he calls the daddy of our clan. I did teach school in Mountain View. In fact, one of my students was Jelly Bryce. Do any of you remember Jelly Bryce? He was the agent in charge of the FBI and one of the world's champion pistol shots. Jelly was a junior when I taught school there. And the year that the superintendent and I went there, the year before, he had whipped the superintendent of schools and ran him off school grounds. So they decided they need a better superintendent, and they got a great big old tough football player, Tom Rogers, and he didn't have any more trouble. I might tell you that Carl Kobes, the president of the First National Bank there, is good. He was also a junior, and I taught him geometry. They asked me to come and speak there to their 20th Century Club, and I did that April the 1st, so I've been back to Mountain View. I told them it kind of reminded me, 50 years ago, 51 years ago I was there, in 1924, it reminded me of the jingle. The years speed by like jets in the air. Today, vibrant youth. Tomorrow, Medicare. While I was, since I was poor, we kids had to work or we didn't go to school. And one year I went out in northern Kansas to sell books. And I'll never forget the first magazine article we got from this company. It showed 2 old mules. They were right up against a fence, and each mule was leaning over the fence, eating the other mule's grass. And the title of the picture was The Greenness of the Other Fellow's Territory. And I think about that when folks are leaving Oklahoma. We have a wonderful state right here, and we hope that they will stay, and that's what I was trying to tell these graduates down at Chickasha. Anyway, after I finally got up to where I was making $200 a month, and about 1925 and 6, that wasn't too bad a salary. I didn't do that teaching school. I was moonlighting. I just thought then it was an extra job, but now we call it moonlighting. I worked day and night, and I made $200 a month, but I did quit it and started for Crest with $20 a week, so that's quite a come down. And it's interesting that the man that that talked me into going to Pueblo, Colorado, we later quit and opened a store in Pauls Valley, and we called it Willis Young Company in 1927, 6 and 7. And I went to Kingfisher, and he stayed there, and then eventually we split up. We were good friends, but we just decided to go our own way, and he's retired now. But last fall, we opened a big family center in Pauls Valley, and I went down to the opening, and I invited Mr. Willis out, and we had a great time that day. I am reminded, though, that when we got ready to open our store in Kingfisher, and he still had an interest in it, he said, "Young," says, "I know I can run a store because I have. I don't know that you can because you haven't." And to this day, 50 years almost later, we can train men to right up to where we think we know they've got it. But when we put them in a store, we're always nervous because we don't know whether they can do it. You just don't know till you try. Some make it and some don't. He was a man that never did brag much on you. In fact, I don't think he bragged any. But I remember one time after I'd been in Kingfisher about 6 months, and he had been up every week or two checking me because we didn't have any money and we couldn't afford to lose anything. But one night he checked the books, and I was trimming the windows, and he came up to the window and he says, "R.A., I think you're going to make it." That's the only compliment I ever got from him. While I was in business at Kingfisher, I used to go to New York to buy merchandise, and I got acquainted with a man named E.L. Goslin from Cordell and R.E. Tomlinson from Frederick, and we used to buy together. We'd go in and we'd tell them we were a big chain in Oklahoma. We'd combine our stores, and we'd try to buy cheaper that way, But Mr. Goslin was the promoter, and I've always given him credit for talking me into coming to Oklahoma City. He talked me into it, and he and I moved to Oklahoma City, and we still kept our stores, but we had a warehouse here. And eventually we put in some stores in Oklahoma City, and we called them TG&Y Stores. A lot of people kid me about the Y, the initial Y being last. And I always kid them that if you look at the advertising SIG, you'll notice that the Y is the only one that has the only letter that's registered. But anyway, that's what TG&Y means, Tomlinson, Goslin, and Young. Mr. Tomlinson has been dead a number of years. Mr. Goslin is also retired, but we are still very good friends, and I see him often. In fact, yesterday, or no, I believe it's Friday, it was his 74th birthday. The rest of our history is pretty well what people know about it, and I won't dwell any more on that. We have had plenty, of course, tough decisions to make, along with our share of troubles. And I could talk all night on our troubles, decisions, but I'll just mention a few hurriedly. When I think of the troubles, I think of the Depression that started in 1929 and 1930 and lasted until World War II, as you remember. I'd only been in business myself in Kingfisher about a year or two when the crash of 1929 happened. And how we stayed in business during this depression, I will never know. I did, though, during these depression years, open 8 stores. But I do remember that one time I was getting ready to open the Weatherford store, Weatherford, Oklahoma, and the day we opened was the day the banks closed. Eggs sold for 5 cents a dozen. Cream was 5 cents a pound. I paid the carpenter to put in our shelves and things 25 cents an hour. His salary for that week was $15, and the only thing I regret is he didn't cash the check that Saturday night, and the bank went broke before he cashed the check. But in the middle of the afternoon that day we opened, they quit taking the produce, and the farmers had to take it back. We did the total sum of $130 during Friday and Saturday. But soon after that, I was over at Weatherford, and I heard on the radio that Roosevelt had gone off the gold standard. We'd gone off the gold standard. And I went on to Weatherford, and I took care of what I was doing, and then I came back, and I got to Kingfisher about 6 in the evening. And everybody's gone. I only had one secretary and one warehouse man, but they were both gone. And so I went up to the office, and I worked all night ordering merchandise. Now, this is when we went off the gold standard. Remember, I'd majored in economics in college, and I taught it in high school, and I thought I knew something about it. I've learned since I don't, but then I thought so then. And I bought merchandise all night. Then the next, after I did that, then I had to kind of figure out how to pay for it. And so I went around to the banks, and I did set up the lines of credit so I could pay for them. But I made $20,000 that year, and that's really how I got started in the variety business. That all-night work when I bought merchandise cheap, you might say, before the prices went up. Most of our managers during the war, of course, went to war, and we used girl managers. Again, during the war, at the beginning of the war, we figured prices would go up and merchandise would get scarce. And we had a warehouse at 8th and Broadway, if any of you remember our old warehouse there, 3 stories. And we just packed that thing full of merchandise. And we had merchandise when lots of other companies were out of it, because we had predicted and we guessed right on that one also. Then, of course, after the war, our men came back, and we really started, you might say, expanding a lot faster. We became public, yes. It was about 1945 that at that time I had 18 stores, and we had about 10 or 11 TG&Y stores. Mr. Goslin had 3 stores, and Mr. Tomlinson had 2 stores, and we put them all together, and we formed the company TG&Y Stores and took in a bunch of our managers as stockholders also. So that's how we got started as TG&Y, and our slogan in those times was, "For your dollar's best buy, try TG&Y." I tell WKY we opened a store at 8th and Broadway. When we opened that store right during the war, WKY wanted to have an on-the-spot broadcast, and so they, you know, in the olden days when radio, that's the way they used to do, have these on-the-spot broadcasts. And they were there, and they were interviewing some of our visitors. We had a man from Beatrice, Nebraska down, and they interviewed him, and about a half an hour later, so a lady come up busting in the door, and she says, "Where's that man from Beatrice, Nebraska?" And you know, that convinced me that advertising pays as far as radios were concerned. I might add as I go along, and I got this when I was teaching school, and I was teaching psychology, and I learned that ideas are fleeting. You got them now, but if you don't nab them, they're liable to be gone. And I developed a little black notebook. I have it here. This is the same notebook I started in 1926. It's had about 100 covers and 10,000 fillers, but it's the same old notebook. And I'd go out all week. I'd be out in the stores all week, and every time I'd think an idea, I'd jot it down. And I've said that this little notebook helped build our company. I even write my jokes down, and you folks at the chamber, you know I'm always writing the stories down, and that's where they are. But I do think this notebook helped build our company. And I try to teach our managers, when you get an idea, write it down, because it may be gone. And I believe the psychology teachers will agree with this. Another thing I learned in psychology, our old psychology teacher taught us up at Stillwater that I've never, that one of the best things I ever learned. He says, if you want to grow, if you really want to grow, always have a job too big for you. Well, with my limited ability, I'll tell you, I always had a job too big for me. And some folks say that, well, it didn't work with you, but I tell them, well, you don't know how dumb I was when I started. And I've preached that to this day. Always, if you want to grow, always have a job, because you know we're naturally lazy, and you have to keep reaching, always keep reaching, struggling, trying to get ahead. Another thing I learned from when I was up at Stillwater is, if you're going to do anything, you've got to keep struggling at it, and you've got to think. Our teacher always tried to tell us, do you think out the right answer? And he told us a little formula that I've always used. He says, see all you can, hear all you can, and that's your research in your mind, and then from it you think. I told him down at Chickasha, though, about the boy that used that idea on the discussion group, maybe like this. He came to a discussion group, and he didn't say a word. Someone asked him, well, you didn't say anything. He said, I came here to learn. I already knew what I would have said. You know, a lot of folks, if they think if they try real hard, they're afraid they'll make a mistake. I think it was Roy Howard, the newspaper man, said, a man who doesn't make mistakes is not trying hard enough. And I believe that is true. Many people have asked me how we find competent managers. I think that is the biggest question people ask us all the time. How do you find competent managers? Well, with some of the problems you'd wonder if maybe we don't have any, but we really do. And I might say that management or personnel has not been one of our major problems. I used to say, I can't say it anymore, we have too many stores, but for years I'd say that I could count the managers that we lost that we wanted to keep on the fingers of one hand. We have been very fortunate in keeping good men. And one of the tests of it is when I retired, you know, a lot of businesses, you think, well, now is it going to keep on going? That's really when we started growing, when they got rid of me. And our company has gone by leaps and strides since I officially retired in 1964. This brings me to another policy of ours, and it's one of the main reasons we keep good men. All of our managers are on profit-sharing basis. In fact, all of our executives work on this basis. We keep books on every store, charging them only the expenses of that store, and he knows exactly what it is himself. We don't try to bookkeep him out of any profits. If he's any question at any expense he doesn't understand, well, we're glad to show him and prove to him that it is correct. And so he knows how much he makes. I remember we had a store, well, we still have a store at Norman there, but the old Main Street store, we had a man that when I'd take his statement down, the thing he'd nab it, he'd look at the profit and multiply his percent out. So first thing he wanted to know is how much he made. And that's correct. That's the way it should be. But the manager's bonus comes first. As a result, he's always glad to get help from anyone else. One of the greatest things I ever learned that I preach all the time to our managers is basically our supervisors, and that is how to help the people make a success. During the depth of the Depression, we had girl managers then. When I started, I had nothing but girl managers. And we had a girl at Watonga, and we were having lots of trouble, and it was during the Depression. I'm telling you, just to stay open was a problem. But one time I came in and we'd gone over a lot of trouble and we'd had some pretty serious discussions. But this girl said this after that really summed it up. She says, well, with all our troubles, Mr. Young, when I know you come in the back, when I see you come in that back door, I know you're here to try to help me. And that is what supervision is. If you've got people they're there to try to help you, you can make it go. From these remarks, you have probably already guessed that our company is not a one-man operation. Our present president is E.J. Braun, and the president is the executive officer in our company. I've never believed in one-man decisions because where there's just one man thinking, everybody else is just doing what they're told. And we like to keep the reins open so that the manager of the store can make his own decisions, generally speaking. As I say, I was president of our company 29 years and semi-retired. But after I retired is really when we made our major growth. In our industry, for a number of years, we have been known as the fastest growing chain in the country. How do we do it? Well, one time Mr. Walgreen, who founded the largest drug chain in the world, made this statement. Said if I'd have waited until I was ready, I would have never opened my second store. And that is true. You can't wait until you're ready. You have to go ahead. And that has been our thought. I've heard the statement said you can't get much done unless you go ahead and do it before you are ready. During the depth of the Depression there, we didn't know whether we were going to be in business or not. It does remind me of another story. One time during the Depression, I was over at Hobart, and I'd gone through, this was in summertime. Many of you folks know Oklahoma, and the cotton country, and summertime was pretty dull. And I'd gone over the statement with our manager there, and I finally says, Harry, can you see anything at all good about this statement? He says, I can see one thing. I said, what is that? He said, it'll be easy to beat next year. One of the things I always try to preach to our folks, of course, is enthusiasm. You know, enthusiasm sells merchandise. When I was a student going to school up there and where I had to work or starve, as I told you, I went up to northern Kansas to sell books. We sold a book, a Stock Doctor book, for $8.75. We sold one then in 3 volumes, the same stuff, but in 3 volumes in Caratol binding for $17.50. Well, I'd been out there 2 months and hadn't sold one of that $17.50 book. I'd been able to sell quite a few of the $8.75. But one time this little magazine that came out as they was trying to get you to sell books, they had a little article in there and it says, enthusiasm sells books. I read that over real carefully. I almost memorized it that night, and I says, in the morning, I'm going to try it. And I went out and I just almost ran to my prospect, and I gave him this real good sales talk and asked him if he'd like to sign under Mr. Jones here, who had bought a $17.50 set of books, which I hadn't sold but someone else had. He said yes. I was so nervous I almost fainted. Enthusiasm sells merchandise, and I'm a great believer in it, and its enthusiasm is what keeps men keeps them in your business. To keep up the enthusiasm among our employees and our customers, we're great believers in advertising. You know, there's an old saying, the man who hollers down the well about the goods he has to sell will never reap the golden dollars like he who climbs a tree and hollers. I'm a great believer in hollering. I've also heard doing business without advertising is like winking at a girl in the dark. You may know what you're doing, but nobody else does. So we are believers in advertising. Our company, in fact, was the first variety chain to do national, go out after newspaper and radio advertising in a big way. It was our belief in advertising that got us to establish this point of sale advertising, which is our central sales promotion. Just in conclusion, what does the future hold? It holds plenty of competition, of course, which reminds me of a definition of a crook. A crook is a competitor that's doing well. While we don't like competition, especially in our business, we have to admit it keeps us on our toes. And as I look to the future, I preach to our folks to not let up, to keep the pressure on all the time. Find new and better ways to distribute merchandise. When I was president of Oklahoma City Chamber of Commerce, we made a 4-day tour one time, and we went to a lot of places, but I remember at Cape Kennedy, Dr. Werner von Braun spoke to us. And this was before a man was on the moon. He was so convincing that he sold me that they'd put a man on the moon, and I never doubted it until they finally did, as you know. He said they were having a lot of people objecting to the expense of this, and they thought it was unnecessary. And he read us a letter he got from one lady. She says, "Why do we have to get in this race for space? Why can't we stay home and watch television like God intended?" You know, too many people these days want to get to the promised land without going through the wilderness. I think we have been through the wilderness, but we cannot relax. You know, there's an old saying, about the time you think you're a comer, you may be a goner. Someone asked the little boy, who made you? And his answer was, "I ain't done yet." So it is with us. One final story and I'm through. You know, the lady and her husband were having their 50th wedding anniversary, and she was sitting there, and everybody bragging on her and telling what a wonderful marriage relation, how good her husband had been, and what a great marriage it had been. And she looked over her glasses and she said, "So far." So it is with our company. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Y. We appreciate this so much. Well, Mr. Young has consented to answer any questions which you may have, so why not ask them? Dr. Singer.
Where did you all get the money to have 8 children go to graduate from college?
Well, my mother died when I was 8 years old, and my oldest brother, I have 2 brothers. My 2 oldest brothers were engineers, one mechanical and one civil. I had 2 sisters then that were in education. Then I had 3 brothers in agriculture, and I was the only one in business. But it was just a case of working. When the year I was a senior, I had 5 jobs. 5 jobs. Besides carrying my course and graduating. And I was just telling him over at Chickasha, I always am thankful for caps and gowns, because I didn't even have a coat. But you know, nobody knew what I was just as rich as anybody else, because I had a cap and gown. But it was just a case of working. My 2 oldest brothers used to go out in the harvest. Every summer they'd go out in the harvest. And I did janitor job. My wife is, I'm the best janitor she's got around the house, because I can wash, I'm a professional window washer. No one can sweep as well as I can, because I had all that experience when I was going through school, sweeping and washing windows and cleaning up. I had a janitor job there as one of my jobs. And I had a lot of others, but we all had to work as worker starved. And I took military drill for 4 years, and then they furnished the uniform, and that was a big saving. All I did is wear my uniform.
Does your profit-sharing plan extend down through the other employees?
Yes,
beyond
sir.
the manager?
Yes, sir, it does. As much as it can. There has to be a place where it stops, of course. But it goes all the way up to the president. And I might say the president gets his after everybody else is taken off, so that the manager knows that no one else is getting his money.
This isn't a question, but I wanted to say something about the Dalton farm in Dover.
You know,
my mother lived on the adjoining farm, and she told me about this all my life, that she lived next to the Daltons on the adjoining farm. But she died quite a while ago, and I didn't know about the oil, and you've ruined my whole life.
You missed it too, huh?
Raymond, I want to ask Mr. Young here a question, if I may. What steps do you take to determine at what point in a community you're going to establish a new store? How much study and how much thought and planning, advanced planning goes into it?
Well, we have about 6. We have a big real estate department because these men travel all over the United States, and we just have, for example, had a lease meeting this afternoon, which I'm a member of the lease committee. And we have a big board there, and of course they've done all the research, and we like to say this: we don't like to go anywhere where we feel we're not needed. If the place is already well taken care for, kick them on the shins and go somewhere else. We don't, there's no spite in our business. You can't make any money in spite, you know, and we go where we're needed. But we have found one of the best ways to find where the customers are is through aerial photos. And we have lots of aerial photos. We're always trying to get our biggest problem is getting them up to date, because a lot of these cities are building so fast that you don't have them up to date. But we do make a careful analysis, because, you know, when Dean drills an oil well and it's dry, he charges it off and goes on. But we've got a 20-year lease. Boy, we pay rent on that for 20 years, even though it's just as dry as his oil well. All right.
I'd like to ask one question. You hear some people from time to time grumbling that today there's just not as much opportunity and so forth as there used to be for a person who wanted to get ahead and so forth. It's kind of like for you to express your views on that. Would you say that the chances for an individual today are as great as they were when you were doing it?
Of course, I think they're greater, and I'll tell you a problem that we reached when we started in business to really expand. Do you know all the downtown locations were taken? You couldn't get in any of them. Take Oklahoma City here. You had Woolworth, you had Crest, you had Grants, you had Metropolitan, and just there was no thing. So what did we do? You didn't fold up your tent and quit. We went out to the suburbs, and it turned out the suburbs was where we should have gone in the first place. And we were one of the first companies to really go to the suburbs, and we were forced there. Wasn't it as a bright idea of ours that we had to go there or starve? So there's always a way around if you'll just keep thinking. All right?
It appears that your company made a major decision about 10 years ago to the Family Center, a very large thing. Has this resulted in then a corresponding increase?
Yes, it really has. In fact, if we hadn't have done that, we'd probably be out of business today. Over half of our volume now is in our large family centers.
Are some of your departments in the Family Center the least department?
Practically none. We have our photo shops here are leased, and I think that's about all.
The fishing tackle?
Oh no, it's all owned. We don't not leased. No. Now one or two jewelry. Wait a minute. We have 2 or 3 jewelry places, and photo here in Oklahoma City, but that's about all.
You find it difficult to hire employees that have the mental capability to add, modify, and make change in ideas?
Well, let me tell you a little story. I was over at the place, and in Tulsa, and we were trying really to get black people, and we were sincere in doing it because this was a black area and we needed it. And let's face it, I don't think the black people have been given enough opportunities, and it's not their fault. It's our fault, I really feel. But we couldn't get them because we had this arithmetic test. I says, you hire them anyway. Forget the arithmetic test. And this manager said, well, whenever you ask them how many inches in a yard and they say 47, it makes you wonder. But you have to train them.
I made 2 purchases in the TG&Y store the other evening.
I'm innocent.
Same items. One should have been $4.50. The clerk ran up $2.25. I explained to her, she was a little unhappy. Then I went to the other store to buy some more of the same article, and that person made it.
Oh me! And you wonder how we still stay in business. I'm trying to quit.
I'm in it too.
Mr. Young, we appreciate that. That was a delightful presentation. We really love that humor of yours also. Thank you so much for being with us, and we hope you'll stay the next hour too, you and Ms. Young.
We'll have
Paul?
the books right out here at the reception desk. I still don't see Mr. Shirt, but maybe if you'll bring it next week, we'll sign it for you. But we'll be happy to sell them anyway.
10-minute break now. Be back in about 10 minutes, sharp. Thank you.
That was great.